Sydney. Recently, Ike returned to the UK to make this Music Masters video. It's a great chance to learn in a very practical way from one of the masters of the instrument, and I'll be taking an all too rare opportunity to play a tune with Ike at the end of the session. But for now, I'm proud to introduce you to one of the world's great guitarists and teachers, Ike Isaacs.
Hello, my name is Ike Isaacs. I was born in Rangoon, Burma, many, many years ago. And I started playing the guitar in 1934. I was about 14 years of age and was very interested in chordal sounds. Have a gifted ear for music. That's one of those things that you're born with. I could hear harmonies. And so I tried to apply these harmonies to the guitar, chord voicings, chord progressions, and rhythm guitar playing, which was the order of the day. There was no electric guitar when I started. So because of these things, I really worked hard and explored the instrument every day, trying to find some little new facet that I could incorporate in my playing or show friends or show students. And this is what I'm going to talk about today: chord voicings and various forms of internal movements in chords and chord progressions. So we'll carry on and see what's going to happen. So now we're going to talk about chord voicings. Here we have an ordinary chord of G, we all know. Rich, robust, open string, clangy, whatever you like to call it. Here we've got a closed chord of G major. You can see that there. Now what we're going to do is have just three notes, three voiced notes, where we just dampen one string, which we'll explain to you about later. Now this constitutes a note G. We can see that as a note G. Now my next note should be D, which is the fifth of G chord. It's an open string. I'm taking my hand off to show you. D. So that's the D. So I've got the G and the D together. Now the next note I need is the B. Now where do I find the B here? On the third string. I put my little finger on B. I've got a G major triad, which is the G, the D, and the B. Now struck together with that little damping that goes on, you've got a chord of that description, which you can use strumming-wise. It gives a nice pulse. You can hear that. Or even picking. It makes a nice lilting movement to a G arpeggio. So for the arpeggio, you need to strike all the notes. Now there are two ways of doing that. You could do all downstrokes like, or you could do down, up, down, up, down. The damping thing, I've got to talk to you about that. It's a little bit of a trick there. Now I'm going to play a G note by just pointing my finger up here and clearly playing that G. Now, if I strike across, I hit the A, don't I? Now, if I just slightly move my hand so that the pad of the hand, of the finger, touches that next string. Now, I can't hear anything here. I'm just hearing the G and a little bit of a wisp. I put my little finger onto the B, so and that helps the formation of the hand. So now you're also hearing a little bit of a clicky sort of sound from that damping. That tends to give a bit of a lilt or lift to one's playing. So if I play a rhythm, it gives a pulse rather than being a sonorous, non-defined rhythmic note. Now we have this G chord here. Now, if I just move my hand up there, it should be an A flat. But it wouldn't. Why? Because there's that open D still there. So the D has to go up half a tone as the other fingers have gone up a half a tone, the D will go up half a tone. So for the D becomes an E flat. So I've got my A flat, my E flat, and my C as an A flat chord. So here you are. I can hit it there. That's a lovely A flat sound. Now I could keep moving that up in semitones and get the various chords. But remember, the root is there. So I've got A flat, A, then I've got a B flat, B. I can keep moving. Now notice that when I get to the A flat position, it's a terrible stretch, isn't it? But don't despair. With a little bit of practice and perseverance, you'll be able to get it. If you're tired, don't persist, because your muscles will be strained. So rest for a while and coax your hands into the position. Short intervals, just practice that. Well, we've had this G major chord here. Now, every major chord, there's a corresponding minor chord. And how do you get a minor chord? You flatten the third. So in this case, B is the third of G major. To get the minor, I just flatten it, take it down. I move my little finger down to the third finger still there. I've got my G, and I've got my B flat, and the open D. So I've got my G minor sound here. Now, to be able to get an A flat minor, I move this up, and the same way I have to raise up that fifth, that open D has got to become an E flat, so I've got my A flat minor. Then I move up again, I've got my A minor. One more time, B flat minor. So I can have a progression, arbitrary progression. Very foreboding, isn't it? So in film music or something, not to do with a melody, but to create a mood, if you want to compose a piece with that sort of mood, you use these sort of progressions. So they all have a place in music. When you learn a chord, when you learn a voice chord, try and flavor it. Remember it like the taste of coffee, the taste of tea or something, and incorporate it in your own compositions. If you want to write music, you get a feeling and you get an inspiration from the harmonic roots that you supply, the harmonic background that you supply. G minor, A flat minor. So we've had the G minor. Now we're going to transfer chords laterally across the fingerboard. We've had the bass note on the sixth string, which was the root. Next we're going to have the B, which is the next note of the G major chord, on the fifth string. So that's going to be our root. Then an open G is going to be the next note, which is the root. So we've got the third, deadened, root, fifth. So third, deadened, root, fifth. So I've found that G chord. It's a G on a B bass. It will be written as G stroke B. And the stroke is under the G and the B is underneath there. So we have that. Hear that? It's a nice pastoral sounding chord. It's lovely. Now, if I want to go higher, I move this B to the C. And this D went up to the E flat. Now that open G has to go up and it goes to the A flat. So instead of me having the fingering that way, which is a rather big gap here, I use this third finger. So I have that C, A flat, E flat. Now watch that C, deadened note, A flat, E flat. So that's my A flat chord. So for all the future shapes that I move up the fingerboard, it'll be this fingering. Only the first one, I have that fingering. Yeah? So I'm just moving up. Oh. can supply all sorts of rhythmic movements if you like, whatever you feel like, or arpeggio. We've done this little bit of picking before. You can apply that. Have adventures. That's what it's all. Having fun and adventures. Now that's the major. What do we do now? We've got to play the minor. Well, to get the minor, we flatten the third. We've got that third there. It goes down, the third. So that's the minor. Foreboding chord, minor chord. And now to go up, we have to raise that up, raise that G up, and that D goes up there. So my first minor was here. The next one up here, raise that, raise that. Can you see that clearly? It was from here to here. Now that's the shape we hold on to because it's a movable shape. Now we've got. So these are the minors, where the root is now on the which string? Would be on the third string. Here we have the root on the third string, G minor, A flat minor, A minor. Check it with, we all know the A minor, and hear the sound. I'm matching it up with the A minor. B flat minor, B minor. See the B minor? So there we have a minor movement. Now, do you remember we played the chord of G when we started? We had a G on G bass. Now, we've next had the G on the B bass. Now we're going to have the G on the D bass. Let's see the best way we can evolve that chord. We'll take the first chord that we had, was a G on a G bass. Now, the sixth string is the same tuning as the first string. So, if I want my open D, I've got that there. I've got my B, and I can place that G on the top string. So I've got, listen to that lovely open G sound. That's my G sound. Now, I could move these two up to get the A flat sound, but what about my D? It has to become a D sharp or E flat. I mustn't call it D sharp, it's an A flat chord. That's a pretty big stretch. Don't worry if you can't get it, but just remember that it's possible. You can jump off it. If you can't reach it, if you haven't got the span, don't worry. But you're aware of it now, that this is a voicing that's available. You've got an A flat. So if that's my G now, for me to get G minor, the third has to be flattened half a tone. And that half tone is the B flat. The B becomes the B flat. I've been watching my fingerboard a bit because it's an awkward chord to reach, and as you can see, I have to look down to see that I get it correctly. Now we've got this B flat, so the position was here. I moved that to the B flat, and I've got the G and my open D. So here we go. G minor. Now if I move this up half a tone, I've got an A flat minor, but I've got to raise that D to an E flat. Here's my A flat. So let's have it vamped. Now I can do that, up. So you've got the tonic on top, which is really from that G minor. You can see the G minor there, fragment of it, the D on the bass, which is normally here. That's a big G minor. Here's a pulsing, small voiced G minor. Now let's have some fun with it. Instead of just being an exercise, let's make some musical noises. We've got a G here, and we've got the next G, you remember that? And the last G, which I'm looking at and just showing. So we've got that move, bam. Notice my G, G, G. I can do. The minor, do you remember the G minor? And the G minor that we did on the middle strings, and the last G minor. So in the first position, we've got the G major, and we've got the G minor, Now we go to the next position. We've got the A flat major, which you remember we did. And now the inner A flat major on C, and the last A flat major, the difficult one. So we've got, and the minor is a little easier because that long stretch gets a little closer on the minor. You flatten, and the next one. So we. It's good for an accompaniment to set a rhythm going. We can A minor. If you a pop type of rhythm, or even. So it gives movement to the chord instead of just playing 1, 2, 3, 4, which tends to become a bit hackneyed. It's good for certain types of music. You're playing a nice Russian lively song, but you're playing a sophisticated. So there we are. We've got the major and minor chords spread out in open voicings, played laterally across the strings. Now remember, we started our first chord with the G as the root, and we had the G shape. Now G can also be the third of a chord. What chord would be third of? It would be the third of E flat. So if we want an E flat chord, we have the third, which is our G, then we have E flat, and we have the B flat, which is the fifth. So we got G, E flat, B flat. That's my E flat chord. I'll clear it now so that you can see it clearly. That's my E flat chord. Now the next thing, I've got the minor. To get a minor, what will I do? I'll just flatten that third to a G flat. So I've got G flat minor. Virtually the same chord, shape, all is so simple, just to lower that half a tone. So you got major, minor. In accompaniments, these things happen quite often, and they're very pleasant to listen to, or even. So that's with the third on the bass. Now we're going to do the same lot of things that move laterally across. The next note on E flat is a B flat. So we've got to have an E flat chord with a B flat bass. So we've got the B flat, which is the fifth, then we've got G, which is the third, and we've got E flat on the second string. So the deadened string is the D. Look at, I've got my B flat, deadened, open G. So that's a lovely E flat, isn't it? So I've got my E flat here, and the next E flat is here. Now to get the minor, that G has to be flattened. I can't flatten it there. So for this, I make the allowance of going onto the fourth string, and my deadened string is now going to be the third string. So you can hear the E flat minor here quite clearly. So that my E flat major, E flat minor, remember E flat major, E flat minor, E flat major, E flat minor. And the last one exactly is transferring that shape. You can see that G is there. I'll put it on the top note. So these two notes remain the same. I'll put that here. So I've got my E flat chord here. Open sounding. I get that third flattened. E flat minor. So there we've got E flat major, E flat major, E flat major. Slowly, E flat major, E flat major, E flat major, E flat major, E flat minor, E flat minor, E flat minor, E flat minor. So we've had the G as the root for the G chord. We've had the G as the third of an E flat chord. Now the G has got to be the fifth of something, and the fifth note is the C. So we've got a C. See, if I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, that's my fifth note. So for me to play a chord of C on the fifth note, it will be called C stroke G. You'll see C and a stroke, and under it would be G. So that's my C on G chord, which I have G as the fifth, E as the third, and C as the root. Notice G, deaden, E, C. That's my C on G. Easily done. Now to get the minor, just lower it. A bit of a stretch, but keep persevering. E to the E flat, the third flatten. That's my C minor on the G bass. Now my next move was across, laterally across, I'll have the C of the C chord, which is the root. I've got my root. The fifth would be the G. So root, G, and the third is deadened. Deadened, the third string is deadened, and the third note of the chord is the E. So I've got root, fifth, third. Here's my C chord there. Now to get the minor, flatten the third. That's my third, flattened to the E flat. You can see it derived from our Commoner Garden C minor chord, but that's a big bulky chord. Here we have that delicate, spread out, almost classical sounding, or whatever you like to call it. That's a beautiful C minor. Now, my next C minor would be on the third. C major, I beg your pardon. This is C major. Yeah, this is the third. We've had the G, the fifth. We've had C, the root, E, the third. So we've got the E. The next note is the C. E, C. Second deadened. G, the fifth, which is really extracted from that. You see my G is here. All I do is throw that G across and put it there. Easy to do that way. I've got my C chord on G, now C chord on E. So I've got the movements of the C chord. We'll do the minor first. Flatten the third, minor. So major, flatten the third, minor. So I've got major chords, C. I've got minor chords. The next one would be, and to this. Now this minor chord can be played another way too. It could be with an open string, but that entails a big stretch, because if I have C, G, E, I could have C, open G, E. That's another way of playing C chord. But if I went to the D flat, look at the extensive stretch I'd have. Practically impossible. So that's the reason I voiced this C chord like so, which is from our basic C major shape. See that C major shape? So we do the C minor from here. So we've got our C majors, and our C minors, and this is a bit of a stretch. So we've had these open voice chords. Now let's try and make a little etude out of it. We'll do the blues sequence. You know, we have the three chords of the blues. We've got the G, we've got the C, and we've got the D, and we're back to C. And sometimes we have a C minor as well. So we've actually using four chords. We're using the C chord, at least the G chord, the C chord, the C minor chord, the D chord, and back to the G. So let's play the chords of it, eh? Notice we've used the chords that we've learned, but in different positions. We used the G position and we went to the C here. We could have played the C there as an open chord if we want to. We could have done, instead of, we could have done C, C, C minor, C minor. So we'll do that next time. Let's see what we can do. Make a little etude of it, eh? So we've had the chord of G. Now, we found it had a beautiful voicing. It was good for rhythm. It had lovely things. But there's another thing that we could use. The reason we left that D there in the center was because we could move it up and down. Now, that D is the fifth of the chord of G. Now, if that was the fifth, that would be the augmented fifth. And that would be the sixth. That would be the seventh. And that would be the major seventh. Hearing it? The terminology for that is, they are the guide tones of the characteristic of the chord. If you heard a G chord and you heard that, the guide tone would be the augmented. And this would be the sixth, and that would be seven. Now, let's see what we can do with that. We've got a G chord here, which we all have done before, we've handled. We put our first finger down on the D sharp, G augmented, a nice triad of G augmented. Now, take that third finger off because we've established that we've got the sound of G in our mind. So for comfort's sake, and for the purpose of another chord that's going to follow, we take it off and we go to the, that's the G6. And then here's the G7th. And as we put the G7th on, we replace our G. And then put our third finger down on the F sharp, G major 7th. And we can go back 7th, 6th, augmented, 5th. Let's try it again. One more time. Now we're keeping all the fingers in. When you play slowly, you can do it with... When you play slowly, you can keep the G static all the time. But when you play fast, you just have the movement and the suggestion of the chord progression. Oh. Hearing that clearly? Now, that's the G major 7 movement. We move it up to the A flat major. A bit of a stretch, but worth the trouble. So we pulse the G on the first beat, and or you can hit it syncopated, pa, pa, or 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, depending where you want the pulse to be. If you want a syncopated feel, you place it on the offbeat, like 1 and 2 and 3. So you placed it on the and, so 1, 1, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So it's just a question of the rhythmic impact you want to create. But do it evenly, just on the strong beats for a start, and get your fingers used to that movement, and it's fun. Now, we play the major, we can go to the minor, our G minor plus, or G minor augmented fifth. When you see a plus sign, it means the augmented fifth at all times. So that's my G minor. The plus is the D sharp, so, and the 6 is the E. Now you've heard that thousands of times. Songs have been made. That as well. So it was used in an old tune by Artie Shaw. It was used in the James Bond series. These are the little fragments of things that create a mood, this sort of foreboding mood. That certainly gives a foreboding mood, doesn't it? Now, we've worked on that with the G major here. Now let's see, we go on the next shape of G on the B. So if I've got the G on the B, we've got a G here, so the movement that can take place is on the G note. What can we do? We can get the G sharp, or we call that A flat, and then we go to the A. So we've got my G shape here, add the... So on the G shape, I can move 3 chords. I can go still further. So if you want that sort of sound, make sure that any time you play something, you relish the sound, you taste it, you get the feeling of it so that you can apply it to music, to accompaniments, and it gives you a sense of, a wider sense of musical adventure. Really here. So that's my G ordinary, G with the flattened ninth, C, A is a ninth, flattened ninth, G, the flattened ninth, to the ninth, to the flattened ninth, to G. Notice our damping effect all the time. We use that, it comes in great use. This last G, of course, is a repetition of the low G. You can see that G there. All we did was remove that low G onto the top string, which we've got a G sound. That's G on a D, and we can do the augmented here by and to the sixth and to the seventh, and when we get to the major seventh, it's a bit of a clash chord, you can hear it, but it's acceptable. Down to the seventh. Now if you split it up, it would be quite an interesting. But any way you like to do it. You can do slow or fast, but that's the most difficult of the lot because it has a funny way of reforming your fingers, and that little finger doesn't act very strongly as a pivot on that particular shape. But anyway, you've got the sound, and it's important that you relish the sounds as we talked about before, and learn to apply it wherever you can. And now we're going to the G minor. Now my G major was here, the G minor is here. We can do the same move. That's the flattened ninth, ninth, G minor ninth, flattened ninth. Now again here we have the same thing. We've got a G minor, which is somewhat easier than that, isn't it? This is the major thing, it's awkward. Here we got a G minor, which was transferred from that G minor right here. Augmented fifth, sixth. So what you do is utilize those movements that fall easily within your grasp, within the fingering. If it's difficult and it sounds clumsy, avoid using it. If you practice a few times and you cannot perfect it and get a smooth flow, that's not for your technical sort of, your hand formation or your technical prowess to be able to handle that. And we all have our pons asinorum. Now there's one thing I've got to draw your attention to. We've got this G chord. When we get to the G6 chord, if you look at it, it's also an E minor chord. Because that's a full G6. We all know that G6 shape. Now if we forget the D, and we have that, it's an E minor chord. So let's have it here. G, E minor, or G6. So we've got that. Now with a G minor, we have a G minor, and if we add that note, it's G minor 6. But if we put the C bass and add that C, it's a C7th. So it's a substitution for a C7th. Can you hear the C7 sound? Here's a full C7th, here's a small C7th. C7th, C7th. So it's used as a C7th. Now we'll also look at a diminished shape. We all know the G diminished shape, which is, now if we get rid of that C sharp and just have, we've got a diminished sound. Now, so what have we got? In E minor, we've got a C7th and we've got a G diminished. The C7th, we don't have the root because we're putting the 6th string there. We're not placing the C there. So we've got a C7th, a G minor 6, or a diminished. Now, if we have that, suppose I have a G, and if I want to play G sharp diminished, and if I want to play D7th, so it's a progression. A very common progression. Now, if we played a G of that shape, remember our E flat on G? Now we have G on B. That's second inversion of the chord with the third on the bass. Now if we go down, that would be a diminished, a B flat diminished, and that would be a D7 again. So we have a progression that could be like going down. So we're extending it now. We're playing G, G sharp diminished, D7th, B flat diminished, G on B, B flat diminished, D7th, D7th. See if so that's the use of these fragmentized chords being given substitute names because they embrace part of the full chord that we are talking about. Like the C, full C7, we've got a small C7. Say we have a G, D7th, G on B, which is A minor, back to G on B, fragment of a scale, pam, pam, pam. Minor sound there, or major sound. Now, having played it fast, I'll play it slowly. We do that. We can go further still. We can do a full scale. Which is a G or that way, or even fragmentized that way. In this case, since I'm going here, I use my G like the standard G shape, playing the same intervals, which is G, D, B, G, D, B. But here, because I can fast movement from one to the other. So the reason for that, that's a bit of a jump. It's on the finger, a G shape, to my D7th on A, G on the B bass, A minor. We can go further still, B minor, C major, D major. So I've got the full scale now. Started at this and finished on the long G there. You've got to have a guitar that's nicely in tune. It's important for these high shapes. Adjust your instrument, but that's another story. I'm sure somebody would talk about guitar strings adjustment and tuning and all that. That's a very important factor in your playing, to get your guitar well in tune. So we've got that there. Now we can, if that's my G on B, now really that's a flattened 9, but really it's an E7th, or it's also part of my B diminished. You can see B diminished here, and here you've got fragment of B diminished. Now that could be a C minor 6. I'll explain that to you in a minute. We've got our C minor shape with the open C minor, long C minor, which was that. Now, so we have C minor augmented 5th, C minor 6, the same feeling like the nightmare feeling. So that's C minor 6 here, but it's also a fragment of F7th, because we had G minor 6, a fragment of C7th. C minor 6 is a fragment of F7th. It's just laterally across. Notice the relationship between the G and the C. It's a fifth away, a fourth away the other way. So we've got a C minor plus C minor 6 or F7th. Now that would be C minor 7th. That would be C minor major 7th. So we go. Now this is the minor 6 or the F7th. Also it can be a diminished, like we talked about this being a G diminished. This could be a C diminished. Why? Look at our C diminished. Now I'm leaving out that and I'm just having that, but the fingering I use is that. And the same thing I can do, remember we worked on that diminished, which is a B flat, because we're now in the key of B flat. We were in the key of F before, or we were in the key of G. we're in a major key. So we take the B flat key, B diminished, F 7th, E flat diminished, B flat on D. I've given you a little different chord progression, and I've named them as I go so that you can hear different sequences that you can get. Not just a basic diatonic sequence which goes on the scale, but you can get a chromatic line which we have. And we utilize the chords that we have discovered. We've got a B flat which we know, B diminished. Remember, that's a full B diminished, fragmentized B diminished, F 7th, fragment of, D flat diminished. And now we have our B flat on D. So the movement that like we have a C on E, we've got a B flat on D. So that's a progression again. Now we can do the scale as we did. Fragment of the scale, which is B flat, F 7th on C, B flat on D. We've got a minor chord here. You can hear the sound, major, 7th, major, minor, which is a C minor. Remember we worked a C on the 3rd, that's a C minor. And back to the B flat on the D, F 7th on the C, back to the B flat, a scalic passage. And at the end we can do the same thing, which really embodies the first movement that we had, E flat or F on G, E flat. That's my E flat shape. I've got my E flat shape there. I've got my G minor shape. I can do, that's G minor augmented 5th, which is almost like an E flat. G minor 6. Now again, the G minor 6 could be C 7th, fragment of C 7th, or fragment of diminished. Look at these chords. You see a C 7th here. All I'm doing is leaving out the C. I've got that C 7th. And now look at my diminished chord. All I'm doing is leaving out that C sharp. I've got a diminished chord. So that's an ambiguous chord. But in context, it supplies the quality that's required. So I've got E flat, diminished, a 7th chord, a simple 7th, a diminished, but fragment diminished. So these are chord voicings. You can experiment in hundreds of ways and really enjoy what you're doing. You can split up. You've got an E flat, or all I'm doing is splitting. Or minor, or G minor, G minor. So these are aspects of playing that are 100-fold. So it would take all day to do them all, but it's the fun of the exploration of this instrument. Now we're going to make use of those named chords that we have in several different names in a progression. We have a C. Now this could be C diminished. It was C minor 6, but in this context it's C, C diminished, G on a B bass. Now we have a B flat diminished. Now we have an F, and now we have an A flat diminished, but in this case we won't call it A flat diminished because it's going to lead to C. And what chord leads to C? A G 7th. And we look at a fragment of a G 7th here, and this would be the flattened 9. So we'd call this G7 flat 9 with a flat 9 on the bass onto the C. One more time, we'll play that. Now this was expanded on into a study or a little etude that I wrote a few years ago in a book called Guitar Explorations, using the chords laterally across the fingerboard and using the different inversions that we've talked about. That book is now issued as Jazz Guitar School. It's a little bigger and better.